What's going on, Workforce? Brian here, and welcome to episode 3 of the Casually Hardcore podcast. This podcast is brought to you by all our Patreons. Thank you guys so much for your constant support. That is what makes this podcast possible. Without further ado, let's go ahead and just jump right in.
Trust you to give context.
Oh yeah, welcome back everybody. Welcome to the Casually Hardcore podcast. My name is Brian. Joining me in the spot in this direction, there we go, is Chris, and our special guest Ethys Asher. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Ethys. Welcome to the podcast, episode 3. We've made it. We're official.
Wow.
Yeah.
Three's a pattern.
Basically syndication.
We're just gonna run these 3 like it's gonna be Thamriel, MrHappy, Ethys, just on repeat. There we go. Guys, if you guys haven't checked out the podcast yet, we're a monthly conversational podcast. We are fan funded, like I said in the intro. So if you guys check out our Patreon, that's fantastic. Now for Ethys, he is on YouTube and he's on Twitch at Ethys Asher, and then he's got his Chungos shirt on. So you should be sure if for some reason I'm introducing him to you, let me know, because that would be great. But if you don't know, Ethys is a fantastic lore and story guy, especially when it contains the world of 14. But this is not being a 14 podcast, and hopefully what we get to experience here is a greater depth of Ethys, his knowledge, and just the general conversation about it. So we've got 3, main sections for the podcast today. What we're playing, main topic is story and world building, and the last one is some community feedback. So with that, let's jump into our first introduction here, our first podcast. First topic, our first podcast. Yeah, here we go. So what are we playing? So guys, let's do it. Let's start with you, Ethys. Dude, what are you playing, man?
What am I playing at the moment?
Yes.
I have been absolutely smashing Final Fantasy XV Royal Edition.
Yeah. PC or like PS4?
Yeah, PC.
Did you see the announcements today?
I did.
About the new DLC?
So it was
not done playing.
Aranea.
Yeah.
Arden.
Mm-hmm.
I think it
Luna
was
Freya.
Luna.
Mm-hmm.
And episode Noctis.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking, like, isn't that like the rest of the game?
I know. What's your biggest so I guess, like, if we were going to say one good thing and one bad thing about Final Fantasy 15, like what's your good and what's your bad for that game? Because it is something that, like, I guess even with all past Final Fantasies, people are going to have their favorites, but obviously you're playing it, and I saw that you were fighting Omega the other day, so
I'd say, oh man, it's interesting because, like, my favorite and least favorite aspects are actually, like, really kind of closely related. I guess my favorite is the fact that the diegetic storytelling is, like, really, really strong. The characters, like the main cast anyway, they sort of interact in this really sort of organic, compelling way. Like I've seen a lot of commentators, a lot of journalists saying things like, it makes you feel like you're actually on a road trip with friends. And it really does, like it feels so natural, and the characters are, like, so fleshed out. But on the other hand, the story, like the actual, non-diegetic story that they're trying to tell us is so fractured and so fragmented, and filling in gaps with these DLC episodes is just it's infuriating. Like it's not a good way to tell a story.
It's so weird because I have just I'll get into what I'm not playing here in a minute, but it's like last I played was I was working on Prompto's DLC, and I had finished Gladios, right? And so I'm just in here, and the whole time I'm just like, why is this separate?
Yeah, exactly. Like they're great. They're really good, but it's like, why are they not integrated in the game? And the obvious answer is, time restrictions, a 10-year dev cycle. They needed to publish something. It's it's all of that. But at the same time, it's just frustrating. But yeah, I'm glad that I waited until the PC release before I played it. And I'm glad that, spoilers up until that point, because I think like the form that I played the game in was like basically the best that it's been in. I know a lot of people had disappointments on day one, because it's not just like the DLC episodes, but there's been like a lot of cutscenes added, a lot of dialogue added and stuff like that kind of flesh things out. So yeah, I think I had the best experience of it. It's probably one of my favorite Final Fantasy titles, honestly. The Luminous engine is fantastic, and yeah, I definitely recommend people picking it up. Oh.
Brian's wife's was having a little trouble getting home one time, so he is playing double duty right now.
It's my fault. It's my fault. I know this is weird times for you guys, and I didn't want to record at 3 o'clock in the morning, so I appreciate it very much.
That makes sense. 3 o'clock in the morning. My sister lives in Romania, so it's only 8 hours difference from us, and it's still hard to get like a lot of conversation and a lot of dialogue with her.
Yeah, it is tough. And I've done that a couple of times, but it's
and when you try to schedule, like, especially like something scheduled where you want that uninterrupted time. So when I try to call her on like a birthday or for a holiday, you just really have to like plan, this is the time of day I'm going to call her. She's expecting the call, because otherwise, like I'm eating breakfast, she's eating dinner.
Yeah, exactly. It's not good.
How often do you stream?
How often do I stream? I stream 5 nights a week. For about 5 or 6 hours, so basically full time.
Is you don't have to answer this, but do you have like a job outside of this, or is this like your primary gig? Like,
no,
how is that?
I'm completely committed. Basically since I graduated, I was doing like a lot of like hospitality and stuff like that while I was doing undergrad. And when I graduated, I basically said to myself, all right, I want to try committing to this full time for like a couple of years. See if I can float, see if I can get away with it. And you know, it's hard, but I'm making it work for the time being. So
how scary was that initial jump, that initial push into the water? Did you already have some traction going in, or what was the time?
Yeah, I did. Well, it was at the I mean,
obviously you weren't streaming 40
It was
hours
near the beginning of 2016, so it was a bit over 12 months ago now. And I already had like a following on YouTube, and I was basically just starting to get into the Twitch side of things, and working on like transferring that audience. So it wasn't like I wasn't going in completely blind. Like I knew what I had to do, and I knew how I had to do it. So yeah, I mean,
they don't always play nice. Amazon and Google aren't exactly there to like help you transfer an audience from one to the other.
No, of course not. Yeah, and you're completely
it's not in their best interest.
Yeah, you're completely on your own without a safety net of any kind.
Yeah.
But it was the first thing I've done for a long while that I really, really love doing. I was like, well, if I don't try like committing myself to it full time and see if I can make it work, then you know.
If committing a couple of years to it, that's ballsy. I don't know. Are you married or anything? I don't.
No.
Okay, that helps.
That does help.
Because when I tell my wife like I want to take a leap into some, even just like a hobby, like I want to start like running on Saturday mornings. Yeah. That's like this whole, we have to evaluate how that like fits into our life. And then if you're single, it's like, well, let me think that over. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go.
I'm just going to come in laughing like, I have no idea what the context is.
Right.
Well, guys,
okay.
obviously
you can cut that into interim. That was our intermission content.
Oh, really? Great. All right.
Very
oh my gosh, yeah. This is
so you're talking about 15.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So go like Ethys, did you have any more thoughts to share on 15 before I jump in on it?
No, you can jump in.
All right, man. I'm actually slightly jealous that obviously you coming in with the PC release, because it is this better fleshed out product. It is it left me with more questions and then answers. And that's not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to a game. Like it left me wanting to learn more about this world, about Lucius, about the Empire, you know, with the Nephilim. I wanted to learn more about their whole thing. By the way, we might get into spoilers. Obviously, we're talking with a story and lore guy. So we'll put a hashtag on that in that case. But as far as it goes, like, you know, you hit the nail on the head with the brothers. Like, it's like the only thing I wish is that I wish I could have had more, I guess, AI control of them. I wish I could have said, okay, I want you to spec more on healing. I want you, you know, because Gladio is obviously defense. You know, he's already, you know, he wants to be the shield for, you know, the prince. And it's like, okay, you know, it's like, yeah, let's make him and focus him tank. But I didn't feel like, I really felt like the game could have used the Gambit system to a certain degree.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, something like the Gambit, not necessarily the Gambit system, but something where you can, like, assign, like, particular roles.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you can do that with the techniques, like you say Gladio, for instance. Well, there's a technique where you can, like, you know, get into shield people. There's a lot of techniques that, like, Ignis has, which are kind of support based, and also, like, when you get into late game with the accessories you can get, like, certain accessories which will, like, I'm using the accessory. It's the only way I managed to get through Castle Mark Tower. The can't use any items. Is that I gave Ignis an accessory where he'd automatically, like, toss me an elixir if I got below half maximum.
Oh, dude. So elixirs are the best thing in the game, too, because obviously, crazy, you lose maximum life. I thought that that was an interesting concept, because at first, like, when I first started playing, I was like, why isn't my life filling up all the way? And then I realized that there is this extra, like, you've gotten hit so hard, it's knocked down your temporary maximum HP. The AI in combat, like, is really frustrating sometimes, because with
they
magic,
don't dodge anything. Like, there's so many mechanics, like, particularly in the super bosses and stuff, where, like, you dodge it or you die. So you dodge it, and then you're throwing out Phoenix Downs and high potions to the rest of your party for the next 20 seconds.
Yeah. Well, and like if we're like, oh, I'm gonna cast magic, and it's like, of course they're all just standing right next to where the magic's gonna go off, and of course it's gonna like hurt them. Okay, well, I ended up really rarely even wanting to use magic, you know, at all. Like, and it just seems so secondary.
That prevents them from taking, like, friendly fire magic damage, and if you're not using that, you just can't use magic. Like you say, you just can't. It's just. I feel like they should learn. I feel like maybe once or twice they get hit by your fireball, and then after that, maybe they learn to, like, step out of it.
Right. If nothing else, like, as your cat, like, holding down to target, like, your magic, like, a little
like,
heads up, guys, like, back away, let's run. So Chris's experience, I know, like, I don't know if you got into it while I was stepped away, Chris, but it was like I've played Comrades a lot. And so the question is that Ethys, have you checked that out? Chris, like, you know, there is a lore piece to that, but
that's all I've done.
What's up? You just done the main story?
No, I just gameplay is fantastic. It is so fun. Everything around that, like, just the level of effort it takes to get into a group. Like, there's just so many little quality of life things. It's like they came out with the most beautiful game for themselves, and they don't want us to have it. And so they're just keeping it over here, and they're wondering how many barriers they can put between us and good gameplay.
They obviously put so much work into it. I only dived into it for, like I say, about 20 minutes, and it was already, like, so clear. It was like, wow, this is huge. Like, look at all, it's crazy.
It didn't make sense. Like, the party system the party system and all that didn't make sense until I played Monster Hunter World. And then all of a sudden I was like, there is a cultural mindset here with this game, because what I was telling like Chris, I was like, there's this like kind of like, I guess, diamond in the rough. There's this core really awesome game, and they've piled all this junk on top of it. It could be the Diablo 3 of Final Fantasy. Comrades could be that dungeon-esque, you get together, pop in, pop out multiplayer, etc. It's not, but it's like there is this, like, I see this potential for that game. And the news today that Chris, like, I think you saw from PAX, they're talking about splitting out the Comrades multiplayer. They said on PC, but then I'm like, they just need to split it out, like, on Xbox and console and everything like that. It just, because it's so weird to go in, load up the full Final Fantasy, and then it's like, okay, comrades is this other thing.
It's like hidden away.
It is.
And
It's
they're starting
tucked.
to push that towards like mod support. So they want it to be this almost like
Yes,
kind of platform. So it'll have chocobo racing and all this other kind of options to build.
Oh my gosh, like that's gonna make me get the PC version.
Yeah.
Well, they're doing Stream Workshop integration. You're gonna have people like building dungeons and
oh my gosh, that's gonna be insane.
Yeah, the level editor could be incredibly powerful.
Well, especially if it integrates into the comrades, because the comrades multiplayer, they've increased the level cap. It's just this. It makes me go, and I guess the question that I'd have for you at this and see your thoughts on it is that, especially because we're all Final Fantasy XIV people as well. Should all Final Fantasies going forward have some multiplayer component? It is the way the industry goes. I mean, it's like you look at the numbers. Multiplayer is the long tail on your game for years and years and years. Obviously, if it's done poorly, then just don't do it. But
because when my friend buys a game, it's not just my friend buying a game in a vacuum. I come back and play it with them, and if I can come back and play it with them, then that's how you get me to buy things like, well, this time around I'll buy a different mount or cosmetics or whatever.
Well,
so
I think
sell.
I think the question there is that, like, okay, aside from like 11 and 14, all the major Final Fantasy titles have been these story-driven single-player like odysseys, right?
Yeah.
If you're assigning dev resources to creating a multiplayer mode, are you detracting from that at all? Because you could say for 15 that maybe they should have focused on like actually finishing the game before they made Comrades,
instead of also a movie and an anime series and
then
Comrades
maybe
could have always been
Comrades as like a standalone on the Luminous engine, like down the track, right? So I mean, it's tough. It's like if you want Final Fantasy theme park multiplayer content, like there's a platform for that in Final Fantasy 14, and I guess the question they need to ask internally is like, well, could this work in Final Fantasy 14? If you have an idea about some multiplayer experience you want to explore, will it work in 14? Well, if it does, then obviously that's the first place where you should think of putting it.
I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Is that when eventually, because at some point there's going to be a replacement for 14, in the online space. Now, it doesn't make a lot of financial sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense the way the MMOs evolve. But what I mean by it is that if they ever do come out with a new Final Fantasy online, should they break it out of the mainline numbered series and just have it be Final Fantasy Online, this persistent online MMO, style game going forward? Because it does feel weird in that sense that, especially from Yoshi P's own comments and his I guess viewpoint is that he doesn't think it's smart to have a company support multiple MMOs, especially when you still have 11 running. You still have subscribers to 11.
Yeah, sure.
It's insane. Like, I was just like, that makes a lot of sense. And then if you look at WoW, like they originally like, okay, we'll let this run to level 100, and then we'll make a new one. And then obviously Overwatch came out of what they attempted. Yeah. But it's like, no, it's like...
but August 14th, we have level 120 unlocked.
There it is. It's like, but it's that, wait, why do we, why do we want to like level the whole playing field again and try to build that base up? It seems like the market in and of itself for MMOs is shifting smaller and smaller as well. I mean, that's just my perception of it. I'd love to know your thoughts.
Well, I don't think it's getting smaller. I think it's just moving towards like hybrids.
Or just more mature. Just it's like these are what you have.
Well, it's like we want all of our games to have these sort of MMO components to them, like you say. So it's moving more in that direction. I think the problem with taking a Final Fantasy MMO out of like the mainline is that you would lose a lot of its like distinctiveness. You know what I mean? It's like, this is another Final Fantasy game. It's got its own story. It's got its own world. It's got its own characters. Whereas if you say, all right, this is just Final Fantasy Online, then I feel like that attitude would come hand in hand with like throwing all that out the door and just be like, no, it's just going to be a Final Fantasy theme park. And you're going to be partying up with Cloud, and you're going to be partying up with Noctis, and you're going to be partying up with Lightning, and you're all going to, and me personally, that doesn't like appeal to me. What was the recent one they did on PS4? The one that was basically like Pokemon. It was like a Final Fantasy.
World.
Yeah, Final Fantasy World, right?
Yeah.
So I looked at that and I was like, okay, this to me is just like a licensed fan fiction. Like this isn't interesting. This isn't compelling. This isn't distinct. And I like Final Fantasy XIV because it is distinct and interesting and compelling, and it is in itself like another edition, another Odyssey.
Did you get a chance to watch the live event today for PAX on the story of Stormblood? They had the head main storyline writer on there. She came over, obviously, so that was translated, and then they had the head of the English localization team. And so they talked a lot about kind of what you're saying about how you build a story. So, you know, Yoshida can come out and say, this is our core conflict issue, and this is our core path to that. And then they're able to go in and shape an entire world around that. And then it's a dialogue between the people who design the dungeons and the localization teams all get together, and there's a story component, and there's, okay, we need the following mechanics, so you have to get us to X conflict points. I think you're right. If you remove 14 from it, if you just say it's Final Fantasy Online for the sake of marketing, there's something nice about constraint developing a story. There's something nice about the direction that putting yourself in a limited tunnel can get you. So it's not just like, well, they made decision A because they wanted to. It's like, well, they made decision A because that's the only logical decision.
Because it's like the natural
X, Y, and Z.
Story. Yeah.
And so that was really interesting.
I guess
I'm not the lore guy here.
I guess
out of the three of us,
on the flip side of that, on the other hand, that's like extra steps that they have to do in the production of content, and there might be something to said for, well, do we need that? Like, can we expedite the process by removing these discussions that the writers and the world builders have to have with the developers, and the developers just make what they want and put it out? And I don't know. I think like a lot of people would also be in favor of that. Not me personally. I think kind of diminish a lot from the experience, and a lot from like the community as well. But that may be the way that we end up moving. That's the way that most like multiplayer games tend to go.
I mean, even WoW doesn't pull from the whole Blizzard universe, right? That's not really its place. And so it's not just Square, I think, is a lot more lore heavy than Blizzard in general. And even Blizzard limits it to what makes sense in their universe. It's still always going to be Alliance and Horde. So
I'm of the opinion that most of what Blizzard puts in their universe doesn't make sense in their universe. And they really don't care too much about like retconning, and they don't care about consistency. It's a lot more like slapdash. I feel like 14 is a lot more like careful and deliberate, and it's like they've made the rules for their universe and they play by those rules all the time. Whereas the WoW lore, it just feels like they're just making up the rules as they go along. So,
at some point, though, like I want to thinking about it is at some point it does feel like there's sometimes I'm like, I wish they had this kind of system or this kind of gameplay element that we don't necessarily need to always have a lore justification, for that element. I do appreciate the lore justification of teleporting costs. That you're, they'd like, well, for the sake of time, we're skipping the cutscene in which that you go and hand the guard the money for teleporting to the Aetherite. But it's like, okay, and it's like, I really appreciate that. But then I'm like, man, it'd be so great if they, brought in, and gamified the world a little bit more. They brought in like, for me, a conquest system. But in order to do some kind of conquest system, and if you guys don't know what that is, from 11, it's just that you had the 3 different cities and they would fight, and based off of the crystals that you gathered, you would essentially control that zone for a week. And there were benefits that was a part of the core gameplay. But it's like, I look at that, I'm like, there's no way that would make sense.
Because we can't join like competing factions.
Right. And it's like you could start in one city because your guild's there, but then if you join a free company, is that who you're fighting with? And then it's like, it's obviously all PvE at that point, but at the same point, I'm like, man, how cool would it be to see, some more gamification of those systems and those ideas, these, like, I would say really interesting and good ideas from Square Enix's, perspective brought into that world itself. I don't know.
So one of the things I want the next segment to go.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
please.
Ethys. But I just want to say, like, where my question with this is you talk about the evolution from 11 to 14, and then of course comparing that directly to like Blizzard, because they're the two titans in the room, right? And so yes, Guild Wars has its own respectable following. Yes, EVE Online has done incredible things in a very different way, and so on and so forth. But they're the two titans in the space, and Blizzard has gone through so many iterations. So they are so far from any form of lore or story, and it came out of a real-time strategy game. So there was never supposed to be lore. So it's all been lipstick on top of that basis. Is there going to be a point where 14 runs out of logical story, like when a soap opera or a sitcom gets too many seasons? Is there going to be a point when 14 needs to become 18 online or 20 online just for the sake of resetting the characters?
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, we know that this current story with the Ascians, with Garlemald, that is like logically going to come to a close. The thing is that they've already started like planting the seeds for future, potential stories to kind of grow from organically. And that's one of the things that like really impresses me about 14, is that when like a new story kind of erupts or a new direction is taken, it's never as spontaneous like as it seems. Like you can always go back and say, oh look, they actually mentioned this like way like years ago, they planted the seeds for this. So 14, I mean, you've got the New World, you've got Mericidia, you've got all these different shards, all these like alternate realities. You've got time travel being canonical, and the potential for the Warrior of Light to actually be like the same Warrior of Light from all of these eras, just like, traveling through time, like preventing, calamities from destroying the world or whatever. There's a logical end, but it is so far down the track. You could easily like make 20 years of Final Fantasy XIV content before it really felt like you were scraping the bottom of the barrel.
And that's an interesting kind of jumping off point to go into kind of our main topic, right? Is that story and lore building. Let's go and transition into that just because I like my transitions. But no, it's like one of the things I do want to ask you at this, because you bring that up, and it's one of the things that I think is critical to the overall success of the game is this concept of calamities. And I guess this is actually a question I've had, of you. And I was like, oh, next time I see him, either at FanFest or now that we're, at the podcast, I'm going to ask you this, is that I'm under the impression and the belief that we have to lose in order for the story to progress, because the, Bahamut was a calamity. Would you think that, Shinryu was a calamity? Do you think that's classified by the Ascian stake?
I mean, the thing is, we have these like this very sort of specific definition of what a calamity is in like a metaphysical sense. It's like enough damage is done to the source that Heidelin has to like collapse one of the shards and like reintegrate it. So it's actually like this dimensional collapse. It's the destruction of one of these alternate universes, effectively. And Shinryu did not cause that, as far as we know. It's very, very unlikely that it did. You need something a little bit bigger than that. It could have. Yeah,
it could have. It could have if they didn't stop them. And
that's the thing. Every big set piece in Final Fantasy XIV so far, like literally every single, extreme primals, warring triads, ultimate weapon, obviously, now Omega, everything has that sort of at stake. It's literally like this: if we do not interfere, then there will be a calamity, and an entire world will be destroyed, and we'll be one step closer towards oblivion. And I think that is so important in terms of getting people invested in the story. Like when was the first time people really like got super invested in the story of Final Fantasy XIV?
I would say it was when we started to see Downland, come out of the sky.
Exactly.
And being a part of that event.
The stakes are suddenly up here, right? And we look at this thing descending upon us, and we think, oh, we have to do something about that.
And that leads me to the idea, though, because it's the Ascian's ultimate goal, and Yoshi P has stated in the past that like Zodiark is eventually going to be a boss. I mean, that could always, I guess, change, but at some point, if we're ever to face off against Zodiark, who is the ultimate, apparently big bad, that he says that even after we defeat him, there's still plenty of stories to tell. There's still plenty of things that they can continue to do. So it doesn't have to, 14 doesn't end with that conflict. But even still with that, to get to him, we have to lose. Like, we have to have a calamity, and being that
we have to have a few.
Yeah, there's still several. So you think of like 5.0, 6.0, so like a 10-year plan here. In my mind, I'm just kind of like trying to budget and pace. And the thing I'm thinking is that at the end of this series, as we go into 5.0, like, just talking about, again, tying in the world building to the game systems, Yoshi P's talked about, like, okay, well, we have to rebuild the first zones if we're going to have flying. We have to do these things. Like, there's like all this kind of work if they're gonna get rid of the class system and merge them into the job system as one. Like, it seems like, with the lore, with the world building aspect that they really invest into the Final Fantasy 14 as this brand, that it's like, well, what better way than what they did with 1.0 to 2.0. Why can't we see that again? WoW had its own, calamity, but I still like when we talk about verses, because Chris has been doing a versus series, with various topics between WoW and 14. It was that, like, Bahamut destroyed the world in like 18 seconds, and what was the dragon's name that caused the calamity in WoW? Like, it took him like forever. I'm asking Chris a lore question. He's like, I don't know. I just click accept quest. Let's go.
I don't know. You can show me a picture of him. I might be able to tell you what loot dropped. I understand the dialogue between lore and game development, but when it comes to a chicken and an egg conversation, I view it more in the way you just described, where it's like, okay, I want the game to do X, Y, and Z. What lore would justify that and tie it together? And does that lore then create any side spinoffs where now, okay, so I came up with technical aspect A, B, and C, then I laid over the lore. Now I have to come up with technical aspect D and E, because otherwise it doesn't work. But that's the extent to which that's why I like watching like an Ethys video where he's like, let me do the 4.0 series in 13 minutes. And I was like, perfect. That's exactly how long I want to know this.
That's the average attention span.
And I would bet your retention analytics behind that says it's something less than 13 minutes.
Yeah, it's gonna be like 8 minutes, 8 minutes, and I'm out.
But that's where I have a question with like the development cycle of an expansion. How do you decide how much story is enough story? Do you feel that Stormblood has hit it on the head? Is it too much, too little? How does that compare to Heavensward, A Realm Reborn?
Well, there's no such thing as too much story, as far as I'm concerned. What's important is pacing, obviously. What's important is how much are people going to be required to consume. And I mean, the big problem people have with like A Realm Reborn, for instance, is that you have to consume everything. You have to do all the story stuff, all the extreme primals and that. Whereas Heavensward and Stormblood have kind of nailed it in that they've kind of separated these adventures, and you only have to do as much as you want to do. So if you run across like the Warring Triad, sort of vaguely in the main story, Heavensward, and you see, Thornton is trying to take the energy of the Warring Triad to create, this basically super god. That's crazy. And they get an opportunity to go and check that out later. You get to decide, well, is that something I care about? So I think that's a good way to do it. But I personally think that you cannot put like too much side content in, too many like fun little like world building fetch quests, and too many conversations with random like passing citizens and stuff like that. Just don't force people to do it in order to progress, right?
Okay, so if you've sectioned the world off into kind of a series of pockets, so we're all forced down this main road, but there's it's not too long, and there's a lot of exits off this road to go enjoy these little pockets of side story, and they all, if you read all of them, it gives a greater context. But somebody like me, I just say, well, which one drops a mount, which one drops a mini pet, awesome, move on with my life. Now you got to build a community around that, because now we get to the final fight, and you have a set of people who don't necessarily understand why the mechanics are the way they are, which fight is when. And so how do you balance building a community around, because if the lore continues to get more and more fragmented, you end up with the main storyline being 5 hours long, and then you've got this 150 hours worth of side content. Do you think that that's going to fracture the community? Because the community is what makes 14 unique.
Yeah, it's definitely tough because on one hand you do have a lot of people that do not care and know absolutely nothing about the story. They're just not interested. Doesn't matter. Just give me the next raid, and I sympathize with that. It's like my attitude towards most games, to be honest. And on the other hand, you have this idea that like the Final Fantasy XIV community and the community of any like large online game really that has like this massive amount of content, the lore is, and the story is like kind of like a culture to us in a way. It's kind of like our history. It's kind of like our culture. And you're right that it does work to like, you know, bring a community together, give a community like a united sense of purpose. Particularly, like we were talking about stakes, we're talking about seeing like Dalamud hanging in the sky, and the way that sort of like unites a community, makes people feel hyped and makes people feel like they're sort of
a part of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And like moving towards one goal together and all that. But I feel like in all the raids we've done, even if you're not paying attention to the story, it's like just the diegetic stuff that's around you, just like the scale of things and the set pieces, it still gives that sense of urgency. It gives that sense of you know, pending calamity. It gives that sense of you know, like time restraint, like we got to do something about this. So even if you don't know why, I feel like we're still like, I guess, emotionally in the same place as a community. I like to think. Anyway.
I just think it's interesting because, like, so a second ago you offhand kind of dismissed Blizzard's lore. Okay? So you said it's not, and I would say that there are people in that community that would be really offended by that, right? And they
absolutely
never experienced. But I mean, Final Fantasy, you talked about it a little earlier, it's a different culture. It's a JRPG almost first. And that's where it came from, as opposed to like a Western RTS out of some guys from California. So there's a different culture at its core root, and what has been built on top of that feels very different, but that is what binds a community. So I say I don't care about lore, but that doesn't mean I don't know the big pieces. It just means I'm not going to sit there and read 27 pages in between killing things. Like, I play a game to kill things. That's what I get joy out of. But like great cutscenes, or knowing, oh wow, that was an awesome dragon, and then it flies off, and then later I see it come back. Like, I get that. There's some basic story elements there.
For a casual player to get immersed in a world, right, requires all of that work to be done.
It does.
If the world is not constructed completely, and if it's not constructed carefully, then you can feel it. Like, as soon as you jump into a game, you can kind of feel whether or not this place feels organic, whether or not this place feels like purposeful and rich, whether or not you're paying that much attention. So if you want people to be immersed in the world to any extent, you kind of need to do that work, like one way or another, I think.
Well, it ties into the concept of world building, is that you put a lot of work into it, so it feels natural, and it feels that it's not in your face. It's just like, if you look at like the history of humanity, it's that the things that affect us today, we might not necessarily be aware that the reason why, I guess, like, we're here in Texas and the culture that Texas is because of, like, this one battle was fought and it went this way. And because of that, it further just changed. And so it's like, time goes by, you forget the battles of the past, but the effects of those things become just second nature and built into it. And so with like that's the thing that, tying this also back to 15, that, we kind of started off with what we're playing, is that world, like, you step into this and they went to such measures to make things just feel natural, like they work in the world, that you don't see something and it just is like, wait, like let's say you're in a medieval fantasy setting and then all of a sudden someone's drinking a soda out of a glass bottle and you're like, wait, like we haven't established that somebody developed that technology, but yet we still only have magic and swords over here. Like what's happening here? And that's where it's like, I think from like any game, that's like, even like with Chris, like you play Warhammer, like they do Warhammer and then Warhammer 40K. It's like they like to take these
and we
these
talk
pieces.
a lot of trash about lore in that game as a board game. That game makes me want to know more about lore, because like when the dice don't go your way, you're like, well,
why?
You didn't go that way because like that's actually the Axe of Fury, and that's just how furious it was being, that it like was actually like murdering the air over here. So it's a lot more like a D&D, like you're just kind of like like oh well, 2 6s and a 5 obviously means it was a more violent kill than just barely passing. And so which the game mechanics don't say that. The game mechanics say 3 wounds is 3 wounds, just let it go. So that's where I'd like to ask you guys. So I think of Brian as somebody who cares about the lore and the story every time I see you pick up a game. You and I don't know if that comes from you being a developer or if you've always had it, but you have this respect for everything was put in this game by a person. And so I want to respect that person's art and their efforts. And as you're saying, like, based on the content that I've watched of yours, I think of you as a very passionate lore guy, a lot like Brian, but you're telling me that there's some games where you don't care about lore. So how do you guys decide? And I, regardless of how much they spend on lore, really just never care. So we have each of the 3 spectrums here. So sorry, don't spend a lot of time
extreme,
writing
middle,
this.
and then not interested.
How do you guys decide what game is worth the lore and what is not? Is it based just on their ability to keep cohesive immersion?
I would even say that it extends to movies for me personally. That it's sometimes like when I watch a movie and if there's a scene that has no context. Let's talk about Transformers and just how much I hated that movie. I was just like, why did they even talk? Like, why did that even happen? Like, if something, and it doesn't have to answer itself then, but after the movie finishes, it's like, then you can kind of look at it as a whole, because during the time, like maybe this scene's going to make sense. Same thing with the game. It's that like, as I'm playing through 15, okay, cool. We're on this road trip. Okay, this is happening. The biggest problem with it, was it's fragmented. Like Ethys said, like it's like you got to really get the story, which is grand. It's like a really grand story. You got to watch a movie. You got to watch the animes that are on YouTube. You got to go and you can watch the trailers because they're a part of the canon. You got to watch. You got to play all the DLC. You got to play the main game. We got new DLC coming out. Like it's that. Like, and the story in and of itself isn't finished. And there's an attraction there. Honestly, I can say with that. But as far as it relates to games, like to your specific question, how do I find out that if it's worth it or not? And that's a tough question. It's a question that's evolving over time, especially as time becomes less available. As my family grows and as work, continues to make sure that, you try to strike that balance. So I've found that I've moved to, games like Tomb Raider and the ones that really can hook me and get me interested in the world as quickly as possible. If you can't hook me within the first hour, I then go and say, is it like outside of the gameplay? If the gameplay sucks, then that's another issue. But focusing on story, I need to have that hook. I need to know why I'm doing this. That's where I think 13 failed, and 12 succeeded for me. 12, I think, is in the story and a world perspective from Final Fantasies, just immensely amazing. Like I cannot praise it enough. It's one of my I think it's 6, 12. And then I could just go down the list. I haven't thought of it in a while. 14's in my top 5. But that's it for me. It's like it's got to have that hook. I think 14 establishes that, even if you weren't coming in from 1.0. That mystery, that this sense of what is going on, what is happening, and that to continue to compel you to move forward. And then it does branch out into all these various things. Ethys, I'd like to know your thoughts on. And that thing. What makes it worth it in a game? Like what is it that gets you going?
I think you're right that you need a hook of some kind. I think as we were saying before, you can sort of intuit as a player whether or not like the work has been done to create this world around you. Like you get a sense for that very, very quickly. And for me, it's not like a decision that you make, really. It's not like, okay, I'm gonna go and read up on some lore. It just happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a combination of those two things. And I don't know, what do you think the hook was for you in Final Fantasy 14? Like I say, the hook for a lot of people seemed to be Dalmud. The hook for me was I'd say like Alig in general, and like running into other ancient ruins, and this sort of intense curiosity about, you know, what they were and how they got to be there. And then once I'd explored them, finding out that they weren't just like sort of pasted there. It wasn't like, oh yes, ancient peoples were once. It's like there's so much under the surface.
Mm-hmm. I think that what I like about like the Alig and the, like, oh gosh, it's the Alig and who's the say Andaporians. I was like, oh man, like, why am I drawing a blank on that? The thing I like about that is that obviously they had struggles, and they had and they've influenced the jobs that we play today. You know, Scholar, Black Mage, now Red Mage. When you think about how like that whole magic came to be,
they're not just a backdrop.
No. They're as important that they are, because they've even somewhat still existed when you start to talk into the clones, and then even with Crystal Tower, how all those then come into play. It is utterly just I really find that hook. Now, obviously the back history isn't what hooked me. It's the stakes that the game lays out, right? Yeah, so exactly. What's the first hook was obviously Dalmud. Like, I honestly felt 1.0 was an emotional journey, you know, for me when I look back at it. You know, it's like I was really excited about when they announced it. We started doing podcasts about it. Like, I paid for 6 months like up front for the game, and the game just fell flat on its face. And so you know what, I'm gonna give it some time. You know, like every game struggles, and then it wasn't coming together. And I'm just like, well, what, you know, like, do I keep playing, or is there something else I want to do? And so the hook is not just Dalmud, it's also the Yoshi P. It's him coming in, introducing himself back in January 1st, like on New Year's. I remember I was over at my sister's in Arkansas, and I wake up and I'm like, hey, there's a post by the new director, which we knew that, you know, someone's taken over. And I read it and I was like, okay, I'm going to see what this guy can do. And then he wins me back. And so the story of 1.0 and 14 is the story of redemption from both the world. I see this parallel, and then with the development cycle, like this rebirth, etc. Like, and then you see it, you know, as an engineer, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I know the struggles that, you know, they're going through. Not personally, because I'm not a part of that, their world, but I've been in these worlds where we've worked our butts off. It fell flat on its face, and we have to rework it in a couple of weeks to get it up and going. So seeing him drop the 2.0 information, seeing them do it and pull it off, like there's that whole thing where it's like, okay, I'm here. And then throughout 2.0, just what, like, they established what I wanted it to be, like what I wanted 1.0 to be, to see it come to life, to experience the world over and over again in this like brand new way, despite the fact that I hated the Shroud. And now I'm like, this is gorgeous. Oh my gosh, thank you, Bahamut. Like, should we go give this man this dragon gifts? Oh, we have to beat him now. But I feel odd about that, because obviously from a lore perspective, he's brought me such joy, you know, as weird as that is. Heaven's Word, the Dragon Song War. I love dragons. Like I'm dyslexic. I really struggled with reading as a child. It wasn't until like digital, like iPads came along, that I've actually been able to read for enjoyment. But I really was able to dive into Final Fantasy and stories about dragons. And so the Heaven's Word was that for me. Stormblood, not so much. I haven't felt that hook personally yet with the story. I love Xenos as the villain. I'm really interested to see where we go with it, but I was like, all right, you know, I guess for me, Ishgard was way more pivotal because I could never get there and I could see it. So, and that's not knocking Stormblood. I think the story of Stormblood has been solid. The after story patches, it just hasn't hooked me yet. It's starting to build. It's kind of like they laid waste you know, in my mind. And now they're, okay, we're starting to build up. And I'm really looking forward to 4.3. Like, to the point where I'm just like, this is a pivotal moment for the patch cycle, for the story going forward, to really kind of say, what are we doing here? You know? Anyway.
I feel that, I think like for the Dragonsong War, right, even after 2.0, you had like Nidhogg kind of hovering over everything, and this sense that he was there. Whereas it's kind of hard to identify like what the stakes are at the moment. Like what's like why do we keep pushing? And that might be something they're kind of missing. So I get that. Yeah, once we defeat Shinryu, it's sort of like, oh, okay, well, job done.
Well, and it's, you know, the Empire is still in the north, you know. They're still a threat. But it, you know, we've had that victory. I'm just interested because, like I said, kind of the more at the top of the podcast, like, when's the shoe gonna drop? Because we've had a lot of victories. Like we did have a big loss in 2.0, and then we went into, like, we've been on this kind of March campaign of victory and dominance.
We've been waiting like for the Empire Strikes Back, right?
Yes,
we've been waiting for that since 4.1. Okay, all right. Well, it's maybe 4.2, maybe next patch. So I get that. The things that are sort of like compelling me through Stormblood at the moment are like the smaller mysteries, particularly like, you know, about the Echo, what's going on with that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole thing, but it's a thing that's not, I guess, so digestible or so like immediately obvious to like every player, right? Because the stakes for that are pretty high, but it's kind of you have to like really sort of dig into it before you realize that the stakes are high.
The I think to go off it, because I do see some chat saying that we did lose at Rogger's Reach at first, and it's like that is true. But overall, like globally, I think we've done real well. So I just, you know, I do want to kind of call that out because it's important. It was an important part of the story. Go ahead.
A lot of people praised 4.0 for being, I guess, like sort of well capped, right? Is that it's its own sort of self-collected journey, which has beginning, middle, and ends. Realm Reborn, like 2.0 didn't have that. 3.0 didn't have that. There was always, you know, it was either incomplete or, you know, in the third act there was like something even more dramatic that sort of turned up that we had to deal with or whatever. And a lot of people were really satisfied that like Stormblood, we did it and we got to go, oh yay, look, we liberated Alamigo and Doma, and oh, that's awesome. But then, like you say, it's sort of satisfying for that moment. It's like
there's a like one kind of final like kind of thought that I had, because there are some really interesting beats when you look at the characters after the fact. I was emotionally moved by 4.1. You know, the and for some reason you can probably give me her name. I don't know why. Fundola, thank you. But her story, her backstory, and that the telling of that, I thought was really compelling. I like that she automatically did not become a hero, even though she acted heroic. I'm looking at both.
Fantastic character.
Oh yeah, her Fundola, and then you look at Yosetsu. And I for me, it automatically draws to mind the concept of the Tale of Two Cities, just from the core concept that we do have these two figures. And the question is and they're both asking the same question: is redemption possible? Is it possible to be redeemed? Is it possible to come back from the brink? Is it possible to have healing and forgiveness and justice at the same time with these characters? And it's I'm interested to see how it goes, because one, you have somebody who's very well aware of who they are and what they've just chosen in life, and then you have another who right now is suffering from amnesia. Well, I mean, presumably, I mean, I believe it right now at the moment. And so it's like, okay, well, I mean, she has no, like, you know, Yosetsu has no concept of wrongdoing. She's like Yatsu, thank you. You know, she has no concept of wrongdoing. That's why I'm glad I got the lore guy, because it's like, man, I'm going to butcher some names, like, yeah, dyslexic and all.
No, it's all right. No, you're fine.
But, you know, and then with, you know, it's like, okay, so how is this going to play out? And that's actually the thing that I find compelling as a part of the after story when it comes to that as well. But building off of that, though, is that, you know, I'm left in a way that's could be good or, you know, could be negative, is just wanting more. You know, I'm wanting to have those stakes brought on the line. I'm wanting to have, you know, some of that feeling of Delmod. You know, I think it's time from a lore perspective that something has to happen. Either the Empire's just going to let us walk all over them. Either they cannot, even with their, you know, manufactured Echo, do anything really to stop the Warrior of Light with the real Echo. But what is the overall Ascian plan? What is, like, the Ascians have played such this back role, and that's kind of what they are. They're kind of like behind the scenes figures. They don't like to be brought into the spotlight. But it's at some point, like, I'm just wanting a good villain, and I think Ilberd in and of itself was probably one of the best villains we've had.
Ilberd was a good villain
because he was right. You know, it's like I like when you break it down. You know, he's going about it in the wrong way, but he is right. In fact, he's the reason why we've taken back, you know, Almingo. He's the reason we've gone on these campaigns. If it wasn't for him and his actions, that might not be the case. We might still be behind the wall, right? Anyway, that's just, it's a hard topic because it's hard to pull off in that MMO setting, because the expansion, you're right, it had that solid beginning, middle, and end. And then the patch cycle is kind of spread out and so long that it's kind of like, I'm ready for that adventure. Chris, you've been quiet for a little bit. I'm gonna let you jump in here if you want to.
So when it comes to an expansion, like I said, I think of everything as like a technical. We have a goal. My issue with Stormblood is it came out with a big bang. I think a lot of people were really happy on launch day, outside of issues where quests weren't working or anything like that. If they could have a smooth experience to the story, I think everybody was really happy. I think people were pleasantly surprised by a few of the dungeons. I think many of the early raids, after we got adjusted for difficulty and everything like that, I think lore-wise felt really cohesive to me. And I didn't personally see a whole lot of outrage over it, but Stormblood to me does feel like they kind of lit too many firecrackers at the beginning. And so as we get into 4.2 and then we look at 4.3 and then 4.4, I don't feel that the pacing was right to give us an entire expansion. I don't feel that they're going to be able to keep us on the edge of our seats, especially under the concept that they said that this expansion may run a little longer. So if we get a 4.6, right? So if we make it all the way to 4.6, maybe even 4.7, how do they have enough story in the bag to do that without just giving us more?
What I'm getting from this is that it's not immediately obvious that the Empire itself is on the brink of a civil war.
Right.
So does that all take place this expansion? Does that all, and that's what our next expansion centers on? That's
what propels us in the next expansion. Again, it's like the stakes are with the Ascians sort of doing their best to like keep the ball rolling and keep this conflict escalating, bringing Xenos back into the mix. The last patch introduced us to these two different factions that are working within the Empire that were basically, you know, involved in their previous civil war, and they're sort of barreling towards the next one. And if you do the work and if you go digging beneath the surface, you realize, okay, wow, this is where we're going. Oh my goodness, this is going to be crazy. But it's not a giant satellite hanging in the sky descending upon us. Like, it needs to be more obvious, I guess.
I agree. I would say yes.
Like, when you study history, nuance is interesting, right? Or when you watch a good series on HBO or something like that, nuance holds. But when I play a game, that's different. When I watch Game of Thrones and I'm sitting there and my hands have no task, there is no mechanics, it is just me taking in the content, then facial expressions and tone and background music and everything like that, even just the amount of screen time a character gets, right? Even just the amount of time somebody talks is all part of the tone, and it's part of setting this whole scene. But in a video game, you're going through getting new tomes, you're going through learning new boss fight mechanics, you're going through basically pushing through certain amounts of story to a tune. So if you're late to a patch because you couldn't play on patch day and your friends are ready to run the dungeon, you're kind of pushed into this like, well, I got to just knock it out. I got to just fly through it. And so there's this gameplay that overlays the story. And so I think setting up for a civil war, right? If we just study like actual history building to a civil war, if you've ever sat through a political history class, it's really intriguing when you're paying attention to the narrative, but it's a lot of people talking. Right.
Yeah,
before the very first big battle, it's a lot of
it's also like very quiet. There's no
it is.
There's a period where there's no big set pieces. It's sort of the calm before the storm, right?
And this politician's injunction is only important in hindsight.
Right, exactly. And
is that what you think, Ethys, that we're in the calm before the storm right now?
I think, yeah, we're in the calm before the storm, or we're in the eye of the storm. Something to that effect. But it's just not. It's not obvious to the casual observer. And that's, I suppose that's a problem.
Well, and it's something that like it ties back to, I think in our pre-show, or it was in the beginning of this, is that it would be so fascinating if there was some form of gameplay element that, you know, you were participating in it. And if it was just subtle feeding you this kind of information where all of a sudden you're like, why are these two, like a fate? Like, why are these Garleans fighting these other Garleans? You know, why is there some skirmish between, well, it doesn't matter, I'm going to go fight and kill it. But we've been exposed to the point because, like, I barely remember anything right now, even though I do, like, enjoy the story. You know, it's like, okay, I do okay, you saying that there's a civil war. It's like, I think I remember hearing or reading something about that, or there was a hint of that, but I'm not actively experiencing it in any of the dungeons or any of the raids or any of the end game.
How do you engage a player in that? So when I think of a engaging time in history, building towards war, but the buildup was the aggression, the buildup was the excitement, I think immediately of the Cold War, right? That was a time when people were taking actions, but there was never we never got the big World War III that everybody thought would come out of it. And so as a gameplay mechanic, why are there not more things like, if we're really building towards this civil war, we're in this eye of the storm, I think of your smaller groups, you know, your free companies, your grand companies saying like, hey guys, like I feel really tense right now. We should be building up rations. Or we should be going and getting information.
That's the problem.
Right.
They don't know because this is all, I mean, you want to use the Cold War analogy, this is all happening behind the Iron Curtain. No one knows. The only person that can really figure it out at the moment is the player. And you know, maybe a couple of other characters.
So it would be almost like where they're basically laying the foundational hints, but at some point we have to shift into that. And then I go the hook on that is that they shift into it. What's the gameplay element? What's the thing that makes it interesting and fun and repeatable? And that's something that I think Yoshi P's talked about even within the open world. It's just like, you know, how do you make this conflict in and of itself fun and interesting and having meaning in and of itself? Because if it's a civil war that happens off screen and all of a sudden there's a new empire or a new emperor or a new king, or they go with a democracy, or, you know, whatever ends up happening, like if it's all off screen, it's like, you know, the Garleans like have possessed us in a way, you know, especially in like, you know, 1.0 and even in a little bit into 2.0 before we went into Heaven's Word. But they've kind of been this, in my mind, from an enemy's perspective, this looming threat that hasn't necessarily, like, if it doesn't like manifest its way in a just this really interesting and compelling, you know, a set piece and story and gameplay element, it has to be eclipsed by something even better. Like,
how do you give it meaning?
The meaning,
right?
It's
not to cut you off. How do you?
No. I'm actually gonna let Ethys see if he can
so
answer.
How do you give it meaning?
How do you give it meaning?
So like when you look at like superhero movies, right?
Yeah.
When you follow comic books, because nobody can ever die. So in Final Fantasy, we don't kill off characters nearly as often as like. Since I brought up Game of Thrones, that's the core opposite, right? Where no matter how much you like somebody, they could be gone the next scene. And then you have these superhero movies where there's big, beautiful battle scenes, right? And so both of these franchises have beautiful battle sequences, and so as a gameplay element, it's easy to see where we would fit in. But so how do you give us the gravity so it doesn't just feel like I'm running the same dungeon over and over during this build-up.
So you're saying like during this build-up, how do we give?
What am I doing?
Of gravity.
Right? Yes.
How do we give an impression of what's at stake? Well, I mean, we saw Xenos kick us to the curb.
Yeah.
Twice. He is one of potentially, mass manufactured soldiers of this type. I think that they need to lean into that a little bit more, is like the Warrior of Light no longer stands alone, and that there are other characters just like us.
I was thinking the Warriors of Darkness would have been more of that, and that's kind of my concern. But go ahead, please. I don't want to cut you off.
The Warriors of Darkness did give that sense, and Xenos is very similar to the Warriors of Darkness, and we know that the Garlands have the capability to basically mass manufacture these, and in order to manufacture these, like in order to give $4 the Echo, they had to kill like 300 people just to use their essence, use their anima in order to do it. And again, there's this hint that, maybe they're trying to do something like this in Doma. Maybe they're trying to harvest people. Maybe that's like the real purpose of these wars, of these conquests. I don't know, like giving more sense to that, I think would make the stakes feel a little bit higher. Again, it's just like the problem at the moment is that if you want to find the stakes, you can go digging, and it's sort of like, oh wow, oh no, oh look at all this. But it's just not, it doesn't like punch you in the face in the way that Dalamud does, in the way that
And I don't think it should, but how do you make the shadow a little darker, right? I don't think it needs to come just literally read me cue cards. But it'd be nice if I could feel I was a little deeper in the shadow, so that it gave me a little more reason to look up and see what's casting the shadow. There's something bigger behind me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard question. Like, I like to think people are either committed to doing that work, or they're not. I feel like, I mean, it's really a question for new players at the moment. It's like, how are they hooking new players right now?
That's the reason I did not. I mean, I've never been a huge lore guy in games, but the reason that I'm particularly far behind on 14 lore as opposed to other games, like I know my Warhammer lore. I do. I haven't read every novel, but when I get every book, I actually read through all my pre-rule. There's like basically 2 sections to every rule book. There's like a lore section, and I read the whole fluff section front to back. But when I came into 14, I came in and there was already an established group at level cap, and many of them had been 1.0 players. So I came in to join Brian and them, and so the game wasn't old, but the people I was playing with had been playing a while, and so I felt this responsibility to catch up with them. And so every moment that I was watching a cutscene, it's like, well, I agreed to catch up with them, not watch a movie. I can watch a movie later. And so by the time you've skipped over 40, 50 hours worth of content, you're like, oh, well, it's kind of late to go back now.
That brings me to a thing that I've actually and this is outside of the lore, but it directly relates to it. It's a system. It's that they did it in Final Fantasy 13 a little bit previously on Final Fantasy 13. It's like that in and of itself is that, especially when you're about to tick over into like 4.3, what I have to do is I have to go to Ethys's channel. And you did your 4.2 rambling video, but it's like, you have to go to YouTube. You have to go outside the game to be able to try to get caught up on, especially when you're playing actively and there's gaps. Now, somebody who comes in today, and let's say they just manhandle it all the way 4.2, and then 4.3 drops, it's like, boom, it's the next episode, it's the next chapter, and they're ready to go. But one of the things that just feature-wise, I was like, what would help is just to help set that, because in a previously, whenever like they do it in Hollywood, they'll show a scene that you haven't even like, oh, there's no, like, why are they calling back? I don't have
to see the previous Iron Mans, right? I can just walk in and see it.
But even still, like in a previously, like in a serial thing, because this is Final Fantasy XIV is a serial. Like, it's going to it has chapters, it has seasons, and it moves forward, and it's been doing this for years. But what they need is that concept, because whenever like you go and you watch anything that's, especially, it's like, why are they doing this callback to season 1? Why is there this story element they're showing in this previously on? It's because there's going to be something in this next chapter that is going to reference it, and unless you're so ingrained and you have it just on the forefront of your mind, you might miss that context when it happens. But if you saw that, like for Chris, like if you just went in, you said that you were like, oh my gosh, Ethys is perfect because he talks about the channel, the story in these chunks, right? So I'm keeping plugging Ethys, guys. You guys should go watch his YouTube videos or hang out with him on stream. But because of that, it's like you're able to get the bulk of the information you need, and all of a sudden you can become, you won't be him, but you'll be at least like informed and maybe feel more hooked into the conflict itself. I do believe though we are in the eye.
Journey is garbage. It's absolutely garbage. We do not have adequate tools in game for people who want to go back and revisit the story or have skipped the story. Trying to dig through that is just a nightmare. It's a joke. It's terrible. I was really hoping, for instance, when they introduced the jump potion, is that they would have some kind of let me
the
sit
same pacing
down
as Hildebrand, just like
well, let me sit down and watch like a 20-minute sort of
25 minutes, like just make it happen.
Exactly. But no, they just say, oh, you can just go to the unending journey. Like,
have you used a jump potion?
One for Heaven's Word, one's for Realm Reborn.
Have you used the jump potion at this? I know where you stand on. Fades to black. You log out, come back in, and then it puts you into the Hall of Novice. Yeah. Like no fanfare, no. I was just like, that's kind of lame. Like I was hoping that it's like. Again, I just give me a previously on. Where you can just go back and you
creators, as creators. Brian and I's bread and butter on this channel is beginner guides, introductions into, okay, you've hit cap. How do you fish? How do you adjust your UI? How do you play this on a controller?
I think I know where you're going with this.
If they actually were to build those things into the game and they were to make the game that easy,
then you're redundant.
We're no longer needed.
Yeah.
So on one hand, I want the game to be better. I want all game developers to literally not even need guide channels. But
you want to be redundant.
They do.
Yes.
So I want the game to be redundant, but it's not in my best interest. Lore, I want them to have these catch-up mechanics. But if they do have these catch-up mechanics, Ethys becomes redundant. So
I disagree. I don't like Steve Jobs, and that's a whole topic for another day. But Steve Jobs says that he said that you should never be afraid to cannibalize a market, because new markets emerge in that regards, and so that it would free Ethys from doing this, and then he could say like, oh, I'm going to go take on this thing. It would take us to say, great, hey guys, this is covered. Go check this out here. This is what we want to create now. You should never be afraid of something going away, especially when it's replaced by something better. And that's where, like, I would say, like, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm also not really pro big farm. And there's some history there. But, it's like, okay, well, are they just curing patients, or are they really trying to cure disease? Are they just treating the symptoms, or are they trying to cure the disease? And it's the same thing. It's like, we should not be afraid of losing out on that. Like if I can become irrelevant for controller guides, thank God, let me go, and I want to go do something else. Yeah, it's like I'm that, but that's who I am as an individual. Like I like to create, I like to think, and heck, I
totally get that.
Yeah.
And there was that concern, like when they announced the law book, for instance, a lot of people were like, oh well, there you go. I was like, no, this is great. This is really, really good, because I try to make videos that kind of like really like dig into like specific things. Yeah. And people like, I don't understand this because the basics of the story are not approachable to me after I skip through it to get to end game. So can you just
that's going to get worse with 7.0 and 8.0 and 9. It's like, oh, you didn't have that 900 hours worth of story ingrained? Because you didn't start playing the game until 2021.
The work I have to do, and the more popular work that I do is just retelling the story in I guess a condensed form, a compelling form, an approachable form. And I would be happy to not have to do that work. I would be happy to do more like, analytic kind of stuff, because I enjoy doing that. So you're absolutely right. I think giving us those tools in game, like that'd be excellent.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they know that the community is kind of all over that. In the same thing with like guides and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, why would they waste the dev resources on that?
That's true. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the constant battle of, do we want new content, or do we want, what do we want? Like, as the community, what feature do we want? There's been, I know within, like even the podcast being Casually Hardcore, I know I'm a mid-tier raider. I'm never going to do Bahamut Ultimate, or maybe not this patch cycle, maybe at some point just for fun. I'm going to attempt it. But I'm happy that content exists as somebody who looks at the health of the game overall as that theme park aspect. I look at Eureka as an interesting experiment, meaning that it brings in lore, it brings in these things, but it's a beta. It's like, it's not finished. But it's sandboxy, and the game needs more sandbox. So it's like, I'm not interested in it at all at the moment, but I hope that they can maybe win me back into that style of content. I look at what the game is lacking, and I want them to make it better, because as far as it goes, like, I'm hooked. It's like, what hooked me, everything. Like, I'm interested in what, I love the fact from a development perspective that what 14 did changed Square Enix as a company. It completely restructured them. It made them rethink everything. I like that Bravery Default really made them go, what? People are interested in this kind of game? Maybe we don't have to be doing, like, what we were thinking was wrong. This isn't just a niche market. I like that Octopath Traveler is coming out this year, and I don't think if Bravery Default was successful that we'd be seeing that. And it's that, I like these changes both in game, but as a company, as somebody who's been a fan of this company and these franchises they've made, who's, like for me, helped me learn how to read and helped me learn how to, I guess, get invested in stories where I couldn't elsewise get into it, because that's just, the nature of the dysfunction there. But I just, there's, there is that thing that, I always have to try to balance, and we do talk about where you got to strike that balance between gameplay and burnout. And that's why I'm really happy to see Ethys is playing 15. But honestly, dude, what I want from you more than anything is I want you to talk. Yeah, I want you to summarize that story for me now. I want you to go into those books that are just laying around like, all right, well, Arden was this old ancient dude and he's like harbored this resentment. Sure, they're going to make the episode, but I don't know, man. Yeah. Like, I love your take on it. I love, like I said earlier, that I love your perspective of taking in philosophy and history, especially as it relates to our world, because Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, world history, they all have influenced all the Final Fantasies and then other games in that regards. And to not, and when you were able to make those connections, it just is so fascinating to me. And so I do appreciate the amount of work you do put into the channel and that effort you do, as well as, like, if they do this a story summary in game, maybe you have more time to dive into.
More time to do that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we need daily lore updates from you.
All right. We got our final segment as host to keep the show going. It's like, I could talk about this all day. And Lord knows Chris is happy that this is here, because I'll be talking to him about the story. And he's like, all right, Brian. So we've got community feedback. If you guys are new to the program, this is something we do over on our channel, but in this case, we are featuring some comments from Ethys's various videos. So we went and curated comments that you guys have made on his channel and picked out a handful, and then we're going to cover them here. Chris, do you see it? This is from Freddy20. You want to read that?
I do. So Freddy20 says, I like your theory of Amdapor to be responsible for the fall of Scala. Could make sense, given that Amdapor was closer to them rather than Mach.
Okay. That's an interesting one. So I think what this is in reference to, so with the War of the Magi, right?
Yeah.
We had 12 different city-states, and the major ones we know are Nim, Amdapor, Mach. Those are the ones that were surviving at the end of the era, effectively. Scala is this new one that's just been introduced that we found out was sort of, knocked out of the running a little while before. And the narrative that we have of the War of the Magi is that the Marquis were these super aggressive, conquering peoples that just went through and obliterated all these other cities. But when we actually get into Sculla, you don't really see any evidence of the Marquis ever having been there.
Mm-hmm.
What you see instead is all of these golems, which could be there for a number of reasons. They could be naturally occurring. They could be defense mechanisms of the Skullans, or they could be, remnants of the era's most famous golemances, which were Amdapori. The Amdapori, like golems and those kinds of magics were their sort of thing. So as I was kind of going through that, I was looking at all these golems and thinking, oh, okay, maybe Amdapor actually destroyed Sculla and not Mark, and maybe things are not as like black and white as they appear to be, and maybe the story that we've been told isn't quite correct. And that is like so often the case. And this is one of the things that I really love about the lore in Final Fantasy in particular, is that there's no omniscient narrator, and everything that we're told is told to us by historians of
that culture.
Within the game's history, in context, and they are often wrong, and they're almost always like missing pieces. So there's always more work for us to be doing. Going through these dungeons, particularly of like, old collapsed civilizations or whatever, they always give us like these interesting little clues. So that was something that I kind of picked up on, and I'm glad that people sort of run with it. It may or may not be true, but it's worth thinking.
We'll absolutely wait to find out. I like that question because it obviously ties into like, those worlds and things that you mentioned that were very, I guess, the hook for you. Like you want to dive more and learn more about these cultures. And I like that they've allowed us to do that, like through the dungeons, being able to go back and explore these and get these hints. Some of them, I think, are the most beautiful dungeons we've had in game so far. All right,
Sculla was fantastic.
Fascinating to speculate on stuff like that. I play a lot of 40K with my brothers, and there will be a battle summed up in my rule books, and there will be a battle summed up in his rule books, and they're summed up differently because they're by that race's historians.
Yeah.
And actually, when you compare stories, there are some spots that overlap, so you assume that's truth, but it could also be possible that they're both wrong.
Exactly.
It's interesting to be like, oh, well.
Yeah. Well, there's some games that like to tell lore, I guess, from outside of the universe. They like to impose it on. They like to have a narrator
like
saying,
a canon.
And here's what happened, and here's how it went. I much prefer the idea of characters like within the context of the game, like historians kind of looking at the clues and trying to work things out, and things being like politicized, and things being like descending into mythology, and the fact that we can never be certain that any of this is true, and that there's lots of work for us to do in terms of discovering what their truth may or may not be. I think that's fantastic. I absolutely love that. It's my favorite thing about the game, honestly.
I think it makes it more relatable, especially to human nature and how we've even been taught history and philosophy and things of that nature, depending on what part of the world we've grown up in, depending on who won a war. Like that's like, oh, of course we were the good guys in this war that we won.
I think there's nothing that like kills curiosity faster than being told what the truth is.
That's true. All right. All right. We got Gobbles up next.
This one's a softball for you.
Yeah.
Glad to see you back on YouTube, Ethys. Thank you for your lore talks. So this is just once again confirmation. How do you decide to add a question to this? Because there's not really a question here. It's just you're awesome and we agree. And if anybody at this point has not gone and subscribed to his channel, we'll be here when you get back. So if you weren't already subscribed. So how do you decide when something needs a video? Like how much content drives a subject of a video?
Honestly, I don't have like quotas or anything for stuff on YouTube. There are some periods that I've gone through where I've released like several videos a week. Then there's been dry spells of like a couple months. I think it's been a couple of months since I released a video.
Chris is saying two.
So what I do is, again, I'm doing Twitch full time. My attitude at the moment is that I dedicate like so many hours, generally about 12 or 15 hours a week, to researching and writing and working on content for YouTube. And if it's something that I think is an interesting video, is a compelling video that's finished, that I'm happy with, then I publish it. And if it's not, it doesn't get published. So I've got like a whole bunch of kind of half-finished projects lying around. YouTube, I don't like to say it's taken a backseat.
It would naturally take a backseat with the 2017. Like, yeah, this almost kind of blends into something we will probably talk about more in the Q&A section after after we wrap up the show. But it's like, gosh, man, like, there's all, you know, the question is like, how much time should you invest at this point? Because all it's going to take is some idiot doing something stupid to make it like,
and it's different.
Why am I here?
I mean, it's a different response for Happy's balance. It's a different response for your balance and Damriel's balance. And that's just three people who all primarily cover a Square Enix game.
See, Mike's balance is that he works about 80 hours a week, and it doesn't like I can't, like, I physically can't do that. That's just insane. That guy's a machine. So the YouTube content, like, I don't like saying it's taking a backseat, because I'm super passionate about it. It's the thing that I enjoy doing the most, but I kind of need to treat it more as like a passion project. And like I say, I'm not forcing anything out. When I've got something that I think is like ready to release, that is interesting, I release it. I don't worry too much about, like, you know, what kind of videos I think people are going to be like really interested in at the moment. I don't really sort of chase the numbers or anything. I just write about what I'm interested in at the time, and if it ends up on a video, then great.
The lesson here is that if you guys are subscribed to Ethys, you need to ring that bell, because of gaps in publishing, you want that bell rung to at least have a chance of being notified. That was a fun.
Ring the bell. It takes the number of channels you're subscribed to, and it runs them through its own algorithm to decide what goes on the homepage. The bell overrides that and guarantees that his next lore video, whenever it is, will automatically be on your homepage. That is at least the story as of today.
We'll see what happens next day. All right, we got our next comment here from Insanity.
I for one was pretty shocked to see Xenos making a return. We've heard about the grave being messed with, but you'd assume the body was used for something like extracting the echo ability or something, but it was what it seems to be, actually Xenos.
Yes, this is a tough one. Like, and it wasn't super obvious. It was like in some pretty throwaway dialogue that Xenos, when he stabbed himself, there was no body to be found. It disappeared. It was gone. And we were expecting it to show up somewhere. Most of us were kind of hoping that he was dead and that he wasn't going to walk away from it.
Yeah.
But I think what they've done is really compelling, and there's a couple of theories floating around. First is that, again, with that scene between Elidibus and Varys quite recently, where Elidibus shows Varys his face, Varys the Emperor, and Varys sort of does a, "Oh, how dare you!" So some people say, "Oh, did Elidibus just like walk in and sort of like possess Xenos's body and walk away?" I mean, that's one theory. You sort of need to ask, well, whose body was Elidibus using up until that point? I think it's Gaius.
I hope so.
Until proven otherwise, so everyone that wears a mask, until proven otherwise, it's Gaius. As far as I'm concerned, always. The other theory is that, well, it's not a simple thing to kill someone with the echo. Like, if you want to kill an Ascian, you need a special, white ore site, and you need to
a lot of aether,
explode them. To defeat the Warriors of Darkness, I mean, like, what was technically happening in that Warriors of Darkness fight is that we were killing them. They're just getting back up. We're killing them. They're getting back up. It's like, well, they got the echo. Like, it's not that simple. So it seems that, at least as far as I'm concerned, it seems that what Xenos has done is he's realized he's come to the end of the line. Like, he's felt something for the first time in his life. And he's thought, well, okay, this is it. I'm never going to replicate this feeling. This is as good a time as any to end it. He's tried to kill himself. this hasn't happened to him before. He hasn't been defeated before. So he's died. He's returned, like literally, you know, he's had return casts, and he's woken up and gone, oh snap! All right, I guess I'm not. I guess
all they did was blood pour it back home to his home, his aetherite.
I mean, pretty much, yeah. Like that's pretty much what seems to have happened. So that's like a little frustrating for some people because it's like, well, you know, how do you make this character compelling? But the thing is, like, what he's doing now is, I don't think he cares about the Empire anymore. I think he only cares about chasing that feeling and replicating that feeling. And I think it makes him a far more threatening and a far more like driven adversary.
Well, immortality, even whether it's perceived or if it's real, in and of itself is an interesting, I guess, story component. Did you ever play Lost Odyssey by any chance? Oh, it's a fantastic game. You know, it's like if you ever get the opportunity, I would recommend that you check that game out. I recommend that game to anybody, especially now because like you can have it preloaded so that you don't have like such long time between. But immortality ends up whether it breeds complacence. Like if you've achieved, you know, whether he's immortal or not, but like the concept that you can die and you're just going to keep coming back, like it can be this sense of like, what else is there? Like what is it, like, you know, what else is there that can stop you? And to feel, and that's what you're kind of, I think what you're getting at, let me know if I'm wrong, but to feel something, to feel mortal, to feel, you know, that there's a challenge, as opposed to like, if everything comes easy to you, like, well, does everything lose its taste? Is there, you know, cause like humanity, you know, in some respects, and not to hopefully discount anybody who's personally struggling through something right now, but there is this sense of the human struggle, the human spirit to overcome, you know, that's the ability, the satisfaction you get upon investing time, effort, and energy, and then like seeing it come to fruition, and then either releasing out to the world in the case of it, like a creator, or in this case, like, you know, in his world, you know, conquering the next big fight to, you know, but if everything, he just walks into the city and there's like, we're done. You know, at some point, like, you're like, what am I doing? Like, you know, I've been bred for this. I've been engineered now for this.
So the only time that he's ever felt any emotion, like literally felt any emotion, is when we defeated him. And would
that make him a psychopath?
He's a psychopath. He's a sociopath.
Yeah,
something to that effect. But that's all he's got, and he decided that, like, oh, okay, well, now I die. Like, I'm done. That's all I needed. But he doesn't have that option. It's not that simple. So it makes him a more interesting character because, like, well, what does he do now? And presumably he keeps chasing that feeling by coming after us and like pushing us to the brink and making us suffer and forcing us to put him in that position again and again and again until we work out a way to like dispose of him permanently.
Almost kind of a play off of what we did in the 2-point series.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, yeah. And it also has that, I guess, that implied consequence of, well, our work is never ending either, and there's no, we don't win at any point. Heideland's not going to relinquish us at any point. We have to keep doing this like forever. This is like Xenos and the Warrior of Light are both. It's like this kind of two-way Sisyphean mirror. So that makes it really compelling. A lot of people were worried, like, oh, no one ever dies permanently in this game, and or it, you know, detracts everything, it diminishes everything. But I think when you really dig into it with Xenos, like I think it is like really compelling, and consistent, and yeah, I mean, I'm excited about it.
I for one am happy to see him make a return because I thought he was such a good villain, and I thought he kind of exited pretty quickly. And that's why I was like, man, they got a lot of hype around Xenos, and now he's gone, and you know, now it's like, oh, good, you know, now I guess his next steps are going to be what I guess define, you know, his overall villainy in that regard. So it'll be interesting for sure. All right, Chris, we got our last comment from Ivory here.
What's a dauntless?
So this is that, like, the video that I was really enjoying, and so I figured, well, let's talk about it.
I mean, I do play other video games when I'm allowed to.
Absolutely, we all do.
Dauntless is in early access at the moment. It's it's of the same genre as Monster Hunter, I'd say, but it's free to play, and it's going to be like 100% free to play with like cosmetic microtransactions and stuff like that. And my good mates, Bradley Dioshi TV, aka RNGesus, he's working on it. He's working like on their community team and stuff. And I just love it. I've been having a really good time with it. It's like, again, it's like a sort of pick up and play Monster Hunter, but with very kind of like Dark Souls style combat, which is one of my absolute favorite sort of franchises and like combat engines.
Dark Souls itself?
Yeah.
It's coming to Switch.
So
in May.
So if you're looking for a PC game that's kind of like I say, the same sort of genre as Monster Hunter, that's free to play, that has, you know, Dark Souls style combat, then I definitely check out Dauntless. It's going to be going into open beta like pretty soon. It's in closed beta at the moment. You can buy into the closed beta.
Do they have like a release date or anything like that? Release window for the game? Or is it one of those? Is it one of those that's like it's always in early access and eventually?
I mean, they're being really
win some awards and then
really good. Out of like any early access game that I've played, they're the ones that I think are most determined to actually finish the dang thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're constantly, you know, patching and like putting in new content and stuff. And I'm really impressed with the work the dev team's doing. They're planning on a full release sometime this year. They're planning on open beta within like the next couple of months. So I just think personally, it's definitely one to keep an eye on.
All right, that's really good because I've seen other people talk about it, and then I was like, "Oh, you're playing it," and then I really liked. So if you guys haven't seen his Dauntless video, you know, and it's true, like you were saying, like, you know, you just kind of put out what you want to put out. So you see your lore videos, like lots of numbers on that one, but then like Dauntless, I was like, "Oh, it's 900 something." It's like, but you're doing this character or something like that. That was I thought it was funny. I was just like, "Oh, this is really great," because you have a really solid voice. You know, it's like your voice is also very distinct. In that regards, and I was just like, so I just was kind of kicking back and just kind of enjoying your teaching people how to craft and gather and within Dauntless. I was like, I have no idea what this is, but then I just like, I thought that was a fun comment that I was like, oh no, I'm gonna bring that in. So guys, we're gonna be back here in a second for a little casually Q&A, and this is just like it's more the fun side of it. But next time, for our next podcast, we've got Rob of Rule of Two Review. He's going to be joining us on the podcast here either at the end of this month or the beginning of May. We're going to be talking about Nintendo. So you don't know Rob, be sure to tune in next time, and we will be hanging out with him. And it's going to be a lot of fun, especially because the Nintendo is such on this tear. You know, it is this darling of, I guess, of gamers right now for the most part. And so Ethys, with our segment into the preview of the next show, is there anything you want to plug, promote, share? The floor is yours, good sir.
Oh, geez, look, follow me on Twitter and YouTube and Twitch and all those things. For any Australians listening who play Final Fantasy XIV, we are working really, really hard as a community for Square Enix to notice us.
You kind of get lumped in, you know?
Yeah, look, we managed to convince them to have a presence at PAX at the end of last year in Melbourne, which was awesome. It was so good. They're committed to it again this year. Our ultimate goal is pushing for Australian servers. So if you look up FFXIV ANZ, on Facebook, there's a Facebook group, there's a Twitter page. I'm sort of heavily invested in the community of all that. If you're an Australia New Zealand player, you need to get in on that. It's really, really important. If you ever want to see Australian servers, you need to be part of this community. So
I support it. I always thought it was just interesting because based off of where you guys are in the world, it's like the time zone is there with you know, Japanese and the Philippines and all that. And I'm like, and then you can't really play with the Chinese. So it's like,
well, the problem is that, and this is a very sort of Japanese publisher attitude, is that we're treated either as a subsidiary of the American market or the European market. So we basically, the European community team's responsible for us, but we interact most with the American players. But we play on the Japanese servers where we constantly get berated. And it's so bad. It is so bad how much we get berated. You're lucky if you're playing at 200 pin. So it's yeah.
So you don't play Ninja.
Savage.
So you don't play Ninja.
No, you don't play Ninja. No
Australian ninjas. With that, guys, we're going to sign off. If you're watching on Twitch or later, we'll break this up on YouTube, but we'll sign off and we'll come back here with just a kind of a Q&A and then talk with with chat here as well. So with that, thanks everybody for watching. This has been Brian for Work to Game. Thank you, Ethys, for joining us. Thank you, Chris. I was interested to see what you I was like, how is Chris how is he gonna connect him with this? And you did a great job. I was just like, especially when he's like, let's bash some WoW lore.
I've watched plenty of his content, but what I know about lore, I already know he knows because I learned it from him.
It's like, Chris, teach Ethys a thing or two, and then that would be hilarious to watch because Ethys would be like, what the what? All right, guys.
Insight.
With that, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll be back with Robert of Rule 2 review in the next episode. But until then, take care.